the screams had finally stopped. In the cold December darkness of 1610, soldiers stood outside Chatike Castle in the Kingdom of Hungary, torches flickering against stone walls that had witnessed unspeakable horrors. Inside, they find young women's bodies, some still warm, others bearing marks of torture so severe that hardened military men turned away in disgust. And in the upper chambers, they found her, a countess of extraordinary wealth and power, about to become the most infamous female serial killer in history. And legend now has it that she was a real-world vampire. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the story of Elizabeth Báthory, the Blood Countess. Elizabeth Báthory was born on August 7, 1560, into one of the most powerful families in Hungary, the Bathorys. The Bathorys weren't just wealthy, they were royalty adjacent, owning vast estates across Hungary and Transylvania, commanding armies and intermarrying with kings. Elizabeth grew up in a world of absolute privilege. She was said to be extremely beautiful, highly educated, spoke in multiple languages, and was expected to marry well. And at age 14, she did exactly that, wedding Ferenc Nadezhdy, a 19-year-old military commander known as the Black Knight of Hungary. They sailed into Chatike Castle, located in present-day Slovakia, and Elizabeth took charge of the estates while her husband spent years away fighting the Ottoman Turks. Around this time, Hungary, and especially Transylvania, was a hotbed for witchcraft and the occult. And Elizabeth herself, too, became obsessed with the dark arts, so much so that she surrounded herself with witches who acted as her personal aides and trusted confidants. Perhaps one of the most unsettling little details about Bathory's involvement with the occult comes after a decade of infertile, childless marriage, when she finally had not one, but 4 babies. Elizabeth reportedly informed her husband that none of the births were natural, and that they had all been induced by witchcraft. For the next 2 decades, everything was seemingly okay. Elizabeth was busy managing multiple properties, corresponded with nobility across Europe, doing 16th century rich people stuff. But then, on January 4, 1604, Ferenc died, and something changed. Or perhaps something that had always been there simply no longer had constraints. Following her husband's death, Bathory first moved to the Nadezhdy Palace in Vienna, and this is where the legends take a really dark turn. Local lore claims that monks from the monastery across the street began reporting hearing inhuman shrieks echoing through the night coming from the palace. More disturbing were the claims of blood seen trickling from the palace drains into the cobblestone streets, and the monastery's abbot was simply told that the countess needed fresh meat for her health, whatever that means. Bathory moved around quite a bit, spending time at her various castles before finally returning to make her home at Chatike. There, Elizabeth took young servant girls into her service at her castle with promises of good positions and a better life. But then the rumors started, slowly whispered among the servants and peasant families, that young women who went to work at the castle weren't coming home, that they were dying under very sus circumstances. At first, the deaths were explained away. Illness was common, accidents happened, and who would question a countess? Well, there was one man. The Lutheran pastor at Chatike village confronted the countess over the burial of so many young girls, and he left his successor a report of his suspicions. The second pastor, too, questioned the number of burials, but soon stopped asking questions because somebody advised him that he needed to shut the fuck up and mind his own business if he valued his life. To avoid further scrutiny from the church, Bathory eventually stopped providing Christian burials to her deceased servants. Nonetheless, the disappearances continued. She later started taking daughters of lower nobility into the castle as ladies-in-waiting. It was, for all intents and purposes, a finishing school to teach them court etiquette. These children and young women, aged roughly from 10 to 26, entered Bathory's castle and vanished into its depths. What happened inside those walls would later be detailed in hundreds of pages of trial testimony. Over 300 witnesses, local villages, castle servants, survivors, even Elizabeth's own confidants ended up testifying against her in what would become the trial of the century. What was going on, I hear you ask? Well, allegedly, the Countess had some very peculiar tastes, interests, and hobbies. Sadistic, bloody murders. And she used her power and wealth to lure in a steady stream of victims into her playhouse of horrors. According to the witnesses, Elizabeth didn't work alone. She had an inner circle of loyal sycophants to do her bidding. She was particularly close to Anna Darvilla, a witch from Savar with whom she was rumored to be having a pow-chicka-pow-wow relationship with. Others included Iona Jo, a nurse, Dortoya Zentes, a local witch who was said to be the most active participant in these sessions, Katalin Benensky, and Janos, a young man who was said to be a dwarf. They helped procure victims and assisted in Bathory's 6 sadistic games. The methods of torment inflicted on the victims were medieval in their cruelty. These included, but was not limited to, beatings with clubs and iron rods, burning with heated metal objects and candles, freezing girls in winter by dosing them with water and leaving them outside, mutilation with scissors, large needles, and knives, starvation, and even forcing them into cannibalism. Survivors who escaped testified to seeing other girls get tortured, hearing screams through the night, and witnessing bodies being removed. And speaking of screams, remember when I said that the monks in Vienna heard shrieks into the night coming from the palace? Well, it turns out, allegedly, Elizabeth forced her servants to apply healing ointments to her victims to keep them alive longer so she could continue the torture. And then here's where the story takes its most famous and most disputed turn. At some point, Anna Darvilla, the Savarian witch, convinced Bathory that she would retain her extraordinary beauty if she bathed in the blood of young virgins. And that's all the confirmation she needed to get the most gruesome skincare routine in the history of skincare routines up and running. Peasant girls were systematically rounded up, tortured, and then bled to death so that Bathory could bathe in their blood. It is said that there were iron cages in her castles, where a girl placed inside was slashed to ribbons by movable steel blades, while the Countess standing underneath was showered in warm, fresh blood. Ugh. And this is why Elizabeth Báthory is known worldwide today as the Blood Countess. The image of a vain aristocrat who bathed in the blood of virgins to preserve her youth and beauty has dominated popular culture for centuries, inspiring countless books, films, and gothic fantasies. I mean, you can't spell Bathory without Bath, am I right? Right? Nothing? Okay, moving on. There is just one problem. This probably never happened. The bathing in blood legend doesn't appear in any of the trial documents from 1610 to 1611. No witnesses testified to it and no investigators reported it, and there are no contemporary accounts mentioning it. The story first surfaced over 100 years later in the 18th century, long after everybody involved was dead. The scholars now believe that it was invented, possibly to make an already horrifying story even more sensational, turning her into a literal vampire-like monster, or to serve as some twisted moral tale about female vanity. So, if the most famous thing about Elizabeth Báthory probably isn't true, then what the hell happened? The reality based on trial records is somehow both less fantastical and more disturbing. Elizabeth appears to have tortured and killed young women simply because she could. because she enjoyed the power, and because her social position had always placed her above consequences. Some historians suggest that she may have suffered from mental illness, conditions documented in her family line thanks to all that aristocratic inbreeding. Others point out to the culture of violence she grew up in. Also, she lived in an environment when her husband was celebrated for his brutal military campaigns, and corporal punishment of servants was entirely legal and normalized. Perhaps she simply lacked empathy, a trait not uncommon among those raised to see lower classes as fundamentally different, lesser beings. The end came because Elizabeth made a crucial mistake. Her secret murder spree was going fine until, on some unknown date, Anna de Villiers died, and Elizabeth replaced her with a new confidant, a witch named Ersi Majerova, a local farmer's widow from a nearby village. Bathory was beginning to have doubts about the efficacy of her bloodbaths. Age was finally starting to catch up to her, and it was Majerova who suggested that the remedy was to replace the local Slavic peasant girls with virgins from a higher social class. Basically, to go from a basic account to a platinum subscription, which Bathory proceeded to do with a reckless abandon. And that's when she set up the finishing school I mentioned earlier and started killing daughters of minor nobility. Now here's the thing, peasant girls could disappear without any investigation. But when gentry families with influence began asking questions, the Hungarian state had to respond. King Matthias II, the dude who would later become the Holy Roman Emperor, ordered György Thurzó, the Palatine of Hungary, to investigate the matter. So, on the night of December 29, 1610, Thurzó raided Chatiké Castle with a small army and made the gruesome discoveries that opened the story. They found one girl dead, one dying, and others imprisoned and injured. And bodies were buried everywhere, in the courtyard, in the church cemetery, and various locations around the estate. Elizabeth's accomplices were arrested and tried.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
Some under torture and some without. They all confessed and testified, providing detailed accounts of the murders. The trial records list between 30 and 80 victims, although some testimonies claim the number reached 200 or even high as 650. The latter numbers are likely exaggerated, but even the most conservative estimates make her one of history's most prolific serial killers. Her accomplices were executed brutally, burned alive, Salem style, or beheaded in May 1611. But Elizabeth herself never faced trial. Her social rank protected her from public prosecution, which would have been a scandal for the entire Hungarian nobility. Instead, she was placed under house arrest in her own castle, walled up in a small set of rooms with only slips for food and air. She remained there for 3.5 years in isolation and darkness, until she died on August 21, 1640, at the age of 54. Guards found her face down on the floor. So, what do we make of Elizabeth Báthory? The skeptics have argued that she was framed, that her vast wealth and estates made her a target for the king, who, by the way, owed her money, like a ton of money. Those wars with the Ottoman Empire wasn't cheap. And by declaring her a criminal, he could have just seized her properties and cleared his debt in one sweep. They also point out that she was never allowed to defend herself, that the confessions were obtained through torture, that some accusations seemed designed to justify her imprisonment and seizure of assets. There is likely some truth here. Political motivations and financial interests almost certainly played a role in how aggressively she was pursued and punished. But the sheer volume of testimony, the consistency of accounts across multiple witnesses, and the physical evidence discovered make it nearly impossible to dismiss the core accusations. Something terrible happened at Chatiké Castle, and Elizabeth Báthory was at its center. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of a story isn't the murders themselves. Okay, just hear me out. It isn't the murders themselves, but how long they continued to go unchecked. For years, possibly decades, a woman tortured and killed the vulnerable, while living openly in a society protected by wealth and status. Her story isn't really about bloodbaths or vanity. It's about power, class, and how societies fail to protect those who deemed expendable. The Blood Countess remains imprisoned in her castle not by stone walls anymore, but by legend and infamy. The truth of Elizabeth Báthory is both more complex and more tragic than Gothic fantasy. A reminder that real monsters rarely need supernatural explanations. Human cruelty, given power and opportunity, is horror enough.